The coffee shop on Elm Street was small, always warm, and always full of the same people doing the same thing, talking about other people's lives. Daniel Mercer walked in every morning at 7:14 a.m. Not 7:10. Not 7:20. Always 7:14. He'd order a medium black coffee and a chocolate muffin, not for himself, but because his 6-year-old daughter Zoe had told him the week before that the muffins there were the best thing in the whole universe. He carried it home in a paper bag, set it on the kitchen table beside her school bag, and watched her face light up every single morning. But the people in that coffee shop, they didn't see that. They saw a man with dark circles under his eyes, showing up in a slightly wrinkled shirt that was clean but clearly ironed in a hurry. They saw a man who didn't stop to chat, who paid quickly, who always seemed to be in motion. They talked. Of course they talked. Asterisk, you know he's divorced, right? She left him. Asterisk. Asterisk, I heard he barely makes enough to pay rent. Asterisk. Asterisk, single dad raising a kid alone? I give it a year before that child is with her mother full-time. Asterisk. Asterisk, I heard he lost his last job. Something shady, apparently. Asterisk. Nobody knew where that last rumor started. But once it was out there, it stuck, the way rumors always do in small towns, like gum on a hot sidewalk. By the time Daniel had lived in Maplewood for 8 months, he had a full reputation built entirely out of assumptions, whispers, and one neighbor who claimed to have heard something from someone who'd worked with someone who knew someone. He was the cautionary tale, the tragic figure, the single dad everyone felt sorry for, but nobody actually helped. His neighbor Karen Fielding once told her book club, asterisk, it's just sad, isn't it? A man like that, raising a child alone. No wonder he looks the way he does. Asterisk. The book club nodded sympathetically. None of them had ever spoken to Daniel Mercer directly. Before start next, take a moment to like this story and subscribe. Welcome back. March was cold that year. The kind of cold that gets into your bones. Daniel had been up since 4 a.m. Zoe had a fever. Not dangerous, the doctor said over the phone, but she needed rest, fluids, and someone with her. That someone was, as always, Daniel. He'd called his manager the night before. I need to take the day. Zoe's sick. Silence. Then, asterisk, Daniel, this is the 3rd time this month. Asterisk. I know. I'm sorry. I don't have anyone. Asterisk, we'll talk when you're back in. Asterisk. He knew what that meant. He sat at the edge of Zoe's bed at 4 a.m., her small hand wrapped in his, watching her chest rise and fall. Her cheeks were flushed. Her stuffed rabbit, named Mr. Hopscotch, was tucked under her arm. In that silence, Daniel did the math that he did every few weeks. Rent, $1,400. Due in 9 days. Groceries, $180 left in the account. Car payment, $340, overdue by 3 days. Zoe's school trip coming up, $45. He hadn't told her yet that he wasn't sure if he could make it work. He pressed his hand gently to her forehead. Still warm. How did I get here? He thought, not for the first time. 3 years ago, he'd been different. He'd had a decent salary, a marriage, a plan. Then the company downsized. Then the marriage fell apart. Not with shouting, not with drama, but with the quiet, devastating realization that 2 people had grown into strangers who happened to share a mortgage. His ex-wife Sarah was a good person. She was also someone who couldn't handle uncertainty, and Daniel, in those years, was the definition of uncertain. She'd moved to Seattle. Started over. She called Zoe every Sunday at 6 p.m. and sent birthday cards that always arrived on time. But Zoe lived with Daniel. Because Daniel had asked to be there. Even when it was hard. Even when it was the hardest thing he'd ever done. He whispered to Zoe that morning, quiet enough not to wake her. Asterisk, we're going to be okay. I promise. Asterisk. He didn't know if he believed it. But he said it anyway because she needed to hear it, even in sleep. Layla Hassan had moved to Maplewood 4 months before Daniel, which made her slightly less of an outsider, but still firmly in the newcomer category in a town where some families had lived for 4 generations. She was 34. A pediatric occupational therapist. She'd moved from Chicago after a long-term relationship ended. Not dramatically, just quietly, like a candle burning out, and she'd wanted a slower pace. She first noticed Daniel in the coffee shop. Not because he was particularly striking, though he was in a tired, unpretentious way, but because of what she watched him do. He always ordered two things: a coffee for himself, and something extra, the muffin or later a small orange juice or once a little paper bag of mixed fruit. And he always asked the barista, a young woman named Priya, how she was doing. Not in the performative, half-distracted way that most people did. He stopped. He looked at her. He waited for the actual answer. Once, Layla watched him spend 4 minutes listening to Priya talk about her grandmother's health, nodding, asking questions. Then he paid, tipped generously. She could see the amount on the card reader from where she sat, and left without making it a thing. She noticed. Then she started noticing other things. She noticed that every Friday afternoon, Daniel was at the park near the library, not on his phone, not distracted, but actually present with his daughter. Building things from sticks. Playing a game that seemed to involve elaborate rules Zoe was clearly making up as she went, and Daniel following along completely seriously. She noticed that when Zoe tripped on the pavement one afternoon and started crying, Daniel didn't say, "You're okay," the way most parents reflexively did. He knelt down, looked at her knees, looked at her face, and said, "Asterisk, that looked like it really hurt. Tell me where." Asterisk. He validated the pain first. Layla, as a pediatric occupational therapist, noticed this immediately. She thought, this man has been paying attention. She'd heard the things people said about him. You couldn't live in Maplewood and not hear them. But the man she was observing didn't match the outline people had drawn. So she did what she always did when she was genuinely curious about something. She paid attention longer. It was a Tuesday in April, when they first spoke properly. Layla was reading on a bench outside the library when she heard a small, very serious voice say, "Asterisk, excuse me. Do you know what kind of bug that is?" Asterisk. She looked down. Zoe Mercer, 6 years old, pink rain boots, a look of intense scientific concern on her face, was pointing at a beetle on the pavement. Before Layla could answer, she heard quick footsteps and Daniel's voice. "Zoe, you can't just walk up to..." He stopped when he saw Layla's expression, which was somewhere between amused and charmed. Asterisk, "I'm so sorry." She escaped. Asterisk. "She's fine," Layla said, and looked back at the beetle. "It's a ground beetle. Carabity. Totally harmless, and actually very good for the garden because they eat other insects." Zoe stared at her with the look of someone who had just found their person. Asterisk, "How do you know that?" Asterisk. "I like bugs," Layla said simply. Daniel, who had crouched down to Zoe's level during this exchange, looked up at Layla. "Thank you," he said. "She's been asking me about that beetle for 10 minutes and I told her it was just a bug, which was clearly the wrong answer." "Deeply wrong answer," Zoe confirmed, without looking up from the beetle. Daniel laughed. It was the first time Layla had heard him laugh. Real, unguarded, the kind of laugh that changes a face completely. She thought, there he is. They talked for 20 minutes that afternoon. About bugs, about Maplewood, about the library's surprisingly good graphic novel section. Zoe found 2 more beetles and named them both. Daniel apologized 3 more times for Zoe, bothering her, and Layla told him to stop apologizing. When they said goodbye, Zoe waved very seriously. Daniel smiled and said, Asterisk, "I hope we didn't completely ruin your reading time." Asterisk. "Best interruption I've had in months," Layla said honestly. She walked home thinking about the way he'd laughed. Over the next 6 weeks, they talked more. Not dates. Nothing arranged. Just the organic accumulation of small moments that happen in a small town when 2 people are paying attention. Coffee shop mornings. Park afternoons. Once a long conversation outside the grocery store that lasted so long the ice cream he'd bought for Zoe nearly melted completely. And slowly, Layla began to understand the full picture that Maplewood had deliberately chosen not to assemble. She learned that Daniel had lost his job not because of anything shady, but because he'd refused to falsify inventory reports when his manager asked him to. He'd reported it internally, been quietly let go anyway, and chosen not to make it public because he didn't want Zoe to grow up reading about her father in local news. She learned that the barely making rent story was true, but what nobody mentioned was that he'd turned down a higher-paying job because it required travel 3 weeks a month, and he wasn't willing to be away from Zoe that much. She learned that his ex-wife Sarah had, in fact, offered more child support than he accepted. He declined because she's starting over and Zoe and I manage. She learned that every Saturday morning, he volunteered at a food bank 2 towns over. Not locally because he didn't want the social capital. He wasn't doing it to be seen. None of this was performance. That was the thing. Every single thing Daniel Mercer did was done entirely without an audience. The tips he left, the listening he did, the sacrifices he made, the integrity he held on to when it cost him his job, the choice to put his daughter first at every single turn, quietly, without announcing it, without needing applause. Layla had spent her career working with children. She knew better than most that how a parent behaves when nobody is watching tells you everything about who they actually are. She had been watching Daniel Mercer for months. What she saw was someone rare. June brought a freak thunderstorm that knocked power out across half of Maplewood for 6 hours. Layla had been in the middle of making dinner when the lights went out. She lit candles, found her emergency flashlight, and was settling in with a book when she heard a knock at her door. It was Daniel. And Zoe, in her pajamas, holding Mr. Hopscotch, looking like she was working very hard at being brave. "I'm sorry to bother you," Daniel said. And then, before she could tell him to stop apologizing, "Our building has gas heating and they're asking people to leave as a precaution. I didn't know where else." "Come in," Layla said immediately. "I have candles and leftover pasta." Zoe looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Layla. "Are you sure?" "I'm very sure. Come in." They spent 4 hours in candlelight. They ate pasta. They played a card game Zoe taught them that had, by her own admission, rules that change sometimes. They talked, really talked the way people do when there are no screens and the world feels smaller and quieter. At some point, Zoe fell asleep on the couch, still holding Mr. Hopscotch, a small smile on her face. Daniel and Layla sat across from each other in the candlelight, talking in low voices. He told her about the job, about what he'd refused to do, and why. She told him about Chicago, about the relationship that hadn't ended badly, just faded, about the life she'd been building, and what she was still figuring out. He said, "Do you ever feel like you're behind where you thought you'd be by now?" She looked at him. "All the time." "Me too," he said. "And then I look at her," he nodded towards Zoe, "and I think no. This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The rest of it just hasn't caught up yet." Layla looked at him for a long moment. She thought, "I know you now. And I think you might be the best person I've ever met." She didn't say that, but she thought it. By August, people had started noticing that Layla spent time with Daniel. And Maplewood, being Maplewood, had opinions. Karen Fielding mentioned it to her book club. "I just worry for her, you know? She's new. She doesn't know his history." The book club nodded. Someone else, Maplewood was never short on someone else, approached Layla directly at the farmer's market one Saturday. "You know people talk, right? About you spending time with Daniel Mercer." Layla turned slowly. She recognized the woman, a mother from Zoe's school, always at the gates, always with something to say. "I know," Layla said pleasantly. "You know what people say about him?" "I've heard it," Layla said. "I also know it's not accurate." The woman blinked. She hadn't expected that. "Well, I just thought you should know." "I appreciate that," Layla said, genuinely, without sarcasm. "Have a good morning." She walked away. She wasn't angry. She wasn't defensive. She was certain. And there is nothing in this world quite as unshakable as a quiet person who is completely certain. It was a Sunday in September. Layla was sitting at her kitchen table with her coffee, watching the light come through the window and thinking. She'd been doing a lot of thinking lately. About what she wanted. About what mattered. About the person she was most consistently her best self around. About the man who had, over the course of 8 months, become the thing she looked forward to most. Not because he was perfect. He wasn't. He was sometimes so tired he forgot what he was saying mid-sentence. He worried constantly. She could see it in the small tension he carried around his shoulders. He was too hard on himself when he made mistakes, which was something she'd called him out on twice. But he was honest. Deeply, uncomplicatedly honest. He was present. When he was with you, he was actually with you. He was a father who would, without question or hesitation, choose his daughter's well-being over everything else. And somehow, instead of that making Layla feel like an afterthought, it made her trust him completely. Because a man who keeps his promises to a 6-year-old will keep his promises to you. She set down her coffee. She thought about what her mother had told her once. Layla, don't look for the man everyone is impressed by. Look for the man you respect. She respected Daniel Mercer. She thought about what her best friend Nadia had said, after meeting Daniel at a birthday dinner 2 months ago. I don't know what's wrong with that town. That man is exceptional. She thought about the beetle on the pavement, about the candles and the pasta, and Zoe sleeping on the couch. About a man who tipped well, and listened properly, and sacrificed quietly and never, not once, asked anyone to notice. She opened her phone. She texted Nadia. I'm going to do something. Nadia replied in 4 seconds. Finally. She didn't do it with a ring, at first. That wasn't who she was. She asked him to meet her at the park. Zoe was at a birthday party for 3 hours, which was, Layla had calculated, enough time. He showed up in his usual way, slightly early, coffee in hand. That quiet readiness he always carried. Everything okay? He asked, reading her expression. Sit with me, she said. They sat on the bench, near the library. The same bench where Zoe had first introduced them to the beetle. Layla had rehearsed this. She had a whole speech. She'd written parts of it down, which was something she'd never done for anyone. What came out instead was this. I know what people say about you. I also know it's wrong. I know who you actually are, and I think I know that you are the most genuinely good person I have ever met in my life. Not perfect, but good. Truly good. And I don't want to spend any more time pretending I don't know that. He was very still. I want to build something with you, she continued. And I know that comes with Zoe, and I want that. I want all of it. And I'm not asking you to decide right now, but I'm telling you that I have decided, because I don't want to be the person who knew something true and waited too long to say it. A very long silence. Layla, he said. His voice was strange, not upset, something else. Yeah. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you the same thing for 3 months. She stared at him. He laughed, that real, unguarded laugh that still changed his face completely. I thought you deserved better than whatever situation I'm in, he said. I thought you'd eventually realize that everyone else was right about me. They're not, she said. I know that now, he said. Because you keep showing me. She took the small box from her jacket pocket. Inside was not a ring. It was a compass, small and silver, with an engraving on the back she'd had done the week before. Find your way. I'll be here. He looked at it for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. Is this actually happening? He asked. It's happening, she said. Okay, he said. Okay. Yes. 3 months later, at a small dinner with close friends, Nadia from Chicago, his old college friend Marcus, a few others, someone asked Layla directly. What made you sure? I mean, everyone said. I know what everyone said, Layla told them. But I watched him. For months. And what I saw was someone who does the right thing with absolutely no expectation of being rewarded for it. She looked at Daniel across the table. He was helping Zoe cut her food, completely absorbed in the task. That's not something you can fake. Not for months. Not when nobody's watching. Asterisk. The table was quiet. Most people show you their best version when they want to impress you, she continued. Asterisk. Daniel showed me his actual version. The tired version. The worried version. The version that tips a barista he doesn't know and listens to her for 4 minutes and never mentions it to anyone. Asterisk.
She paused.
Asterisk. That's the version I wanted. Because that version is real. Asterisk. Her friend Nadia was wiping her eyes.
Daniel had looked up by now.
He'd heard. He held her gaze from across the table and did something very simple. He mouthed, "Thank you." She mouthed back, "I know." Karen Fielding heard about the engagement through the Maplewood grapevine, which was faster than fiber optic internet and significantly less accurate. She told her book club. Asterisk. Well, I suppose she knows what she's doing. Asterisk. The book club nodded. Maplewood moved on, as small towns do, to the next story, the next person, the next set of assumptions. Daniel got a new job, a better one, with a company that asked him in the interview what he valued most. He said honesty and stability. They hired him the same week. Zoe, who had known something was different about Layla from the moment of the beetle on the pavement, took the news with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen something coming and was glad the adults had finally caught up. Asterisk. Does this mean Layla is going to be here more? Asterisk. She asked. If you want that, Daniel said carefully. Obviously I want that, Zoe said, in the tone of someone pointing out the obvious to someone very slow. Layla laughed so hard she spilled her coffee. They were married the following spring. Small ceremony. Wildflowers. Zoe wore pink boots. Not the same ones, but a new pair, because she'd grown 3 centimeters since last year and was very proud of this fact. At the reception, Daniel gave one toast. He kept it short because he was, as Layla had come to love, someone who said what he meant and didn't stretch it. He said, Asterisk, I spent a long time feeling like the wrong answer to a question nobody was asking. And then someone came along who was paying enough attention to ask a different question. I will spend the rest of my life being grateful that she didn't listen to what everyone else said. And being the person she already decided I was. Asterisk. Layla cried. Nadia cried louder. Zoe ate 3 pieces of cake and declared the day the best day probably. So, back to where we started. What did she know that nobody else did? Here's the truth. She didn't know anything that wasn't available to everyone else in Maplewood. She had access to the same coffee shop, the same park, the same school gates. The only difference was this. She looked. She actually looked without the filter of what everyone else was saying. She paid attention with an open mind and let the real person in front of her tell her who he was, not through their words, but through their choices. The ones nobody was watching. The ones nobody was counting. The ones that showed up quietly every single day, not to impress, not to perform, but simply because that was who Daniel Mercer was. And the lesson, the one I want you to carry out of this story today, is this. The most extraordinary people are often surrounded by a cloud of other people's assumptions. Don't let someone else's story become the story you believe. Look for yourself. Pay attention. Because there are Daniels in your life right now, people written off, whispered about, carrying weight that nobody else has bothered to understand, who are quietly, consistently, unmistakably worth it. The question isn't whether they're there. The question is whether you're paying enough attention to see them. If this story made you feel something, share it with someone who needs to read it right now. Someone who's been judged unfairly. Someone who's been doubted. Someone who might be exactly like Daniel, doing everything right, with nobody watching. And if you want more stories like this, real human moments, psychology-backed, told in a way that makes you feel something, subscribe our channel. Drop a comment below. Have you ever misjudged someone completely? Or been misjudged yourself? Asterisk, asterisk. I read every single one. Written with the belief that the right person, paying the right kind of attention, can change someone's entire story. Asterisk.